In the space between memory and forgetting, there exists a peculiar silence. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of story. Walk through any museum, trace your fingers along the spines of history books, and you'll find the same neat progression. Empires rise, discoveries are made, progress marches forward. But look closer. Notice the gaps, the sudden silences, the moments where the record skips like a broken phonograph, jumping from one certainty to another while something vast and unexplained falls through the cracks. Tonight, we descend into those cracks, into the spaces where history doesn't whisper, it screams, then suddenly goes mute. These aren't tales of gradual decline or natural disaster. These are the moments when people, places, entire ways of life simply stopped. No farewell, no explanation, just absence so complete it seems to mock our need for answers. Some disappeared in full view of witnesses, others vanished so thoroughly that we question if they existed at all. Ships that sailed into calm seas and never returned. Children who walked into the forest in broad daylight and emerged speaking languages that had never been heard. Entire villages found empty, meals still warm on tables, footprints leading nowhere. We tell ourselves that everything leaves a trace, that archaeology and science and patient investigation will eventually illuminate every shadow. But what if some mysteries aren't meant to be solved? What if the very act of vanishing is the message? A reminder that our grip on this world is more tenuous than we dare admit. So settle back. Let the familiar world grow distant. Tonight, we walk the edge of the map, where the cartographer's confident lines give way to blank parchment, and the words, "Here be dragons," seem less like metaphor and more like warning. These are the stories that history tried to forget, but which refuse to be forgotten. They wait in the margins, patient as stones, strange as starlight, beckoning us to wonder, what else have we lost? And perhaps more unsettling still, what didn't want to be found? The fog rolls in thick across the harbour at Brest, France, on a morning in August 1785. Through the grey veil, two ships materialize like ghosts given form, La Boussole and l'Astrolabe, their masts reaching into the mist like fingers grasping for heaven. On the dock, crowds gather despite the early hour. Wives clutch letters they'll never send. Children wave at fathers they'll never see again. They don't know this yet, of course. How could they? This is the age of enlightenment, when French naval power stretches across the globe and science promises to illuminate every dark corner of the earth. Jean-François de Galaup, Comte de la Pérouse, stands on the quarterdeck of La Boussole, every inch the explorer aristocrat. At 44, he has already circumnavigated the globe, fought the British in North America, and earned the personal confidence of King Louis XVI. His mission is nothing less than to complete what Captain Cook began, to map the Pacific, establish French claims, and bring back knowledge that will reshape European understanding of the world's largest ocean. The expedition is meticulously planned. The ships carry 225 men, including astronomers, naturalists, artists, and interpreters. Their holds burst with scientific instruments, chronometers for determining longitude, telescopes for celestial navigation, devices for measuring magnetic variation. Every contingency has been considered, every possibility mapped. For 2.5 years, the expedition exceeds all expectations. La Pérouse's reports arrive in Paris like gifts from another world. He charts the coast of Alaska, explores the shores of California, trades with the inhabitants of Easter Island. His naturalists collect specimens unknown to European science. His artists capture scenes of such beauty and strangeness that Parisians crowd the salons to see them displayed. The reports are more than scientific data. La Pérouse writes with humanity and insight rare for his time. He describes the indigenous peoples he encounters not as savages, but as complex societies with their own wisdom. When his men clash with inhabitants of Samoa, resulting in 12 French deaths, he refuses to take revenge, writing that the Europeans were likely at fault for misunderstanding local customs. In January 1788, the expedition reaches Botany Bay, the new British penal colony in Australia. La Pérouse is cordial but wary of the British, who eye the French ships with equal suspicion. He stays 6 weeks, repairing his vessels, gathering supplies, writing what will be his final reports. British officers visit the French camp, later describing La Pérouse as melancholy, perhaps prescient of some approaching doom. On March 10, 1788, La Boussole and l'Astrolabe sail out of Botany Bay. British observers watch them disappear into the Pacific morning, their sails bright against the endless blue. They are never seen again. At first, no one worries. The Pacific is vast, communication slow. December passes without the ships reaching Île-de-France, but delays are common. By 1789, concern grows. By 1790, with France convulsing in revolution, the fate of 2 ships seems a small matter. But Louis XVI, imprisoned and facing execution, reportedly asks for news of La Pérouse until his final days. In 1791, the revolutionary government, despite its other preoccupations, sends an expedition to find La Pérouse. They find nothing. Over the following decades, search after search yields only rumors. Natives in various island chains report seeing European ships founder in storms. Artifacts that might or might not be French wash up on distant shores. It isn't until 1826 that Irish Captain Peter Dillon, trading in the Santa Cruz Islands, notices French medals and sword guards among the possessions of local inhabitants. Following the trail, he reaches the island of Vanikoro, where elders tell him of 2 great ships that smashed upon their reefs during a hurricane years before. Some men drowned immediately. Others made it to shore, where they built a small boat from the wreckage and sailed away, never to return. A few remained on the island, living among the people until disease and time claimed them. French expeditions to Vanikoro find anchors, cannons, scientific instruments, undoubtedly from La Pérouse's ships. But the full story remains elusive. How long did survivors hold out? Where did those who built the boat attempt to go? Were there messages, journals, attempts to record what happened? In 1962, diving expeditions locate the wrecks themselves, La Boussole broken on the reef, l'Astrolabe in deeper water. Among the artifacts recovered is a sextant, its brass green with coral, still precisely calibrated for measuring the angle between celestial objects. Here is the poignancy of the Enlightenment itself. All those careful instruments, all that accumulated knowledge, powerless against wind and wave and reef. The flames that consumed the Sodder house on Christmas Eve 1945 burned with unusual fury. In the hills of West Virginia, 10 miles outside of Charleston, fire danced against the night sky, while inside, a family's world collapsed into ash and mystery. But this is not a story about fire. This is a story about what the fire was meant to hide, and the 5 children who vanished into the smoke as completely as if they had never existed at all. George and Jenny Sodder had built their American dream with Italian hands and unshakable determination. He had come from Sardinia in 1908, 13 years old, with a quick mind for business. She had immigrated from Italy as a child, carrying old country traditions into the New World. By 1945, they had a successful trucking company, a 2-story home, and 10 children whose names rolled off the tongue like a litany of assimilation: John, Martha, George Jr., Jenny, Betty, Maurice, Louis, Sylvia, and the youngest, 3-year-old Betty. The warning signs, in retrospect, seemed orchestrated by some unseen hand. In October, a stranger had appeared at the house, ostensibly selling life insurance. When George declined, the man's demeanor shifted. "Your goddamn house is going up in smoke," he said, gesturing at the fuse boxes, "and your children are going to be destroyed. You are going to be paid for the dirty remarks you have been making about Mussolini." 2 months later, on the afternoon of Christmas Eve, another stranger arrived seeking work, his eyes scanning the house with unsettling intensity. He pointed to the fuse box and warned that it would cause a fire. The Sodders had recently had the wiring inspected and approved. They dismissed his concerns. That evening, the Sodder home filled with the sounds of Christmas. The younger children, Maurice, 14, Martha, 12, Louis, 9, Jenny, 8, and Betty, 5, pleaded to stay up late playing with their new toys. George, indulgent on Christmas Eve, agreed before heading to bed. At 12:30 a.m., the phone rang. Jenny answered groggily to hear a woman's voice asking for someone she didn't know. Wrong number. As Jenny returned the receiver to its cradle, she noticed the downstairs lights still burning, the front door unlocked. She turned off the lights, secured the door, and returned to bed. 30 minutes later, she woke to the sound of something hitting the roof, rolling down. Then the smell of smoke. "Fire!" George's shout ripped through the house. In the chaos that followed, certain facts emerged with terrible clarity. Marion, John, George Jr., and Sylvia escaped. Baby Betty was carried to safety, but the 5 children who had been playing in the living room were nowhere to be found. George's ladder, always propped against the house, had vanished. His coal trucks, which might have been driven up to the windows for rescue, wouldn't start. Both of them inexplicably dead. The phone line had been cut. By the time a neighbor reached the fire department, the house was consumed. The fire department, only 2.5 miles away, didn't arrive until 8 a.m. In the ashes, the official story took shape with suspicious speed. The 5 missing children had died in the fire, authorities declared. The flames had been hot enough to cremate the bodies completely. No bones, no teeth, nothing remained. But George and Jenny Sodder refused this neat conclusion. The fire had not been hot enough to cremate bodies. Appliances were found intact in the basement. A telephone repairman discovered that the phone line had been cut, not burned. Then came the sightings. A woman claimed she had seen the missing children peering from a passing car while the fire still raged. A Charleston hotel owner reported seeing 4 of the 5 children with 2 women and 2 men of Italian extraction a week after the fire. The investigation was perfunctory at best. The fire chief claimed to have found lumps of flesh in the ashes, evidence he buried without examination in a dynamite box on the scene. When George demanded these remains be exhumed, they proved to be fresh beef liver, never exposed to fire. The coroner issued death certificates without ever visiting the scene. Desperate, the Sodders hired private investigators, offered rewards, pursued every lead. In 1967, Jenny received an envelope postmarked from Kentucky. Inside was a photograph of a young man in his late 20s. On the back, a cryptic message. Louis Sodder. I love Brother Frankie. Ill boys. A 90132 or 35 inches. The handwriting, to Jenny's eyes, belonged to Louis, who would have been 30 by then. George and Jenny erected a billboard along Route 16, visible to all who passed. Photographs of their 5 children, a summary of the case, a plea for information. For decades it stood, weather-beaten but maintained, a monument to refusal to accept, to forget, to stop looking. In the Suffolk village of Woolpit, where the soil runs red with iron and ancient wolf pits once trapped predators in the dark, the harvest of 1150 brought forth something far stranger than grain. The reapers working the fields of Richard de Calne paused in their labour, scythes hanging loose in suddenly nerveless hands. For there, at the mouth of one of the old wolf pits that gave the village its name, stood 2 children unlike any they had ever seen. Their skin was green. Not the pallor of sickness, not painted or stained, but green as young leaves, as if chlorophyll ran through their veins instead of blood. The boy appeared to be no more than 7 years old, the girl perhaps 9 or 10. They wore clothes of an unfamiliar cut, fashioned from materials that seemed to shimmer with their own light. But it was their eyes that unsettled the reapers most, wide with terror, darting like trapped animals, seeing something in the familiar Suffolk countryside that the villagers could not perceive. The children spoke, but in no language anyone recognized. Not English, not French, not Latin. The sounds that emerged from their mouths were melodious, but utterly foreign, rising and falling in patterns that seemed to follow rules no earthly tongue obeyed. When the villagers approached, the children clung to each other, backing toward the pit as if they might retreat into whatever realm had disgorged them. Richard de Calne, the lord of the manor, was summoned. A veteran of King Stephen's wars, he had seen strange things in his campaigns, but nothing like this. He ordered the children brought to his manor. They came reluctantly, the girl pulling the boy along, both of them shielding their eyes from the sun as if its light caused them physical pain. At the manor, the full extent of their strangeness revealed itself. They would eat nothing. Bread, meat, fruits, all were examined with confusion and rejected with what seemed like genuine inability rather than stubborn refusal. They grew visibly weaker, the boy especially, his green pallor fading to a sickly grey. It was only when someone brought freshly cut beans from the garden that the children showed interest. But not in the beans themselves. They seized the stalks, splitting them open with desperate fingers, searching inside as if expecting to find something else entirely. When they discovered only hollow stems, they wept with a grief that transcended language. Eventually, through patient demonstration, the household taught them to eat the beans themselves. For months, they would consume nothing else. The boy never adapted. Despite the care lavished upon him, the younger child weakened daily. His green hue faded like autumn leaves, and with it, apparently, whatever vitality had sustained him. When winter came to Suffolk, he did not survive it. The girl proved more resilient. As her diet slowly expanded beyond beans, her skin began to lose its verdant cast. The process was gradual, like watching a painting fade in sunlight. First, the deep forest green lightened to jade, then to a peculiar olive, and finally to a complexion that, while still unusual, no longer marked her as obviously otherworldly. With this physical transformation came a linguistic one. She began to pick up English with remarkable speed, as if her mind, freed from whatever had constrained it, could now process this new world's patterns. Within a year, she could communicate, though her accent remained forever unplaceable. It was then that she began to tell her story. She spoke of St. Martin's Land, a country where all the inhabitants were green like herself and her late brother. It was a Christian country, she insisted. Churches stood there, bells rang out across the landscape. But it was a place of perpetual twilight. The sun never rose nor fully set, existing in an eternal state between day and night. When pressed about how she and her brother had come to Woolpit, her account became even more dreamlike. They had been tending their father's flocks, following them into a cave when the animals strayed. Deep in the cave they heard bells, not like the bells of St. Martin's Land, but sweeter, more compelling. They followed the sound through passages that seemed to wind impossibly. The bell music grew louder until suddenly they emerged into blinding light. The Atlantic Ocean around the Flannan Isles knows only one language: violence. 20 miles west of the Outer Hebrides, 7 small islands rise from waters that have never known true calm. Here, waves born in the depths of the North Atlantic gather their strength for one final assault on Scotland. It was to this desolate outpost that 3 men came in December 1900 to tend a light that stood between ships and destruction. They would vanish as completely as the vessels they were meant to save. The Flannan Isles Lighthouse was only a year old when it claimed its keepers. Built on Island Moor, the largest of the islands, though large here means barely a quarter-mile across, it stood 150 feet above the waves on a cliff that had defied the ocean since the world was young. The construction had taken 4 years, with workers battling seas that could rise without warning. When the lighthouse was finally commissioned on December 7, 1899, it was hailed as a triumph of Victorian engineering. Its light could pierce 21 miles of Atlantic darkness. The keepers who manned this outpost were chosen carefully. 3 men at a time, with a 4th rotating in monthly. Enough for safety, few enough that the cramped quarters remained tolerable. In December 1900, those 3 men were James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur. Ducat, the principal keeper, was a veteran of the service at 53, known for his meticulous attention to duty. Marshall, the first assistant, was younger but equally experienced, a cheerful man who wrote poetry in his spare time. MacArthur was the occasional keeper, a skilled seaman who had grown up in the Hebrides. On December 7, 1900, all 3 men were at their posts. The log, in Ducat's careful hand, recorded nothing unusual. Ships passing in the night reported seeing the light burning steady and strong. Then, on December 15th, the light went out. The steamship Archtor, passing the Flannans, noted the darkness where light should have been. It wasn't until December 26th that the lighthouse tender Hesperus, carrying Joseph Moore as the relief keeper, finally reached Island Moor. Moore would later describe the growing unease as they approached the island. No flag flew from the lighthouse. No figure appeared on the landing to help secure the boat. When he climbed the steep stairs cut into the cliff face, calling out to his colleagues, only the wind answered. The lighthouse door was closed but unlocked. Inside, the clock had stopped. The beds were unmade, unusual for Ducat. In the kitchen, a meal sat uneaten on the table, an overturned chair the only sign of disturbance. Everything else was in perfect order. Moore's investigation revealed puzzling details. The lighthouse log ended abruptly on December 15th, but not with Ducat's final entry. The last words were in Marshall's hand, noting severe winds on December 12th. On December 13th, he wrote of the storm continuing, of Ducat quiet and MacArthur crying. The final entry, December 15th. Storm ended, sea calm. God is over all. But the truly bewildering discovery came at the west landing. Iron railings were bent and twisted. A metal box secured 110 feet above sea level had been ripped from its foundations. Yet the east landing remained untouched. In the lighthouse, 2 sets of oilskins were missing, Ducat's and Marshall's. MacArthur's remained on its hook. The official investigation concluded that the men had been swept away by an unprecedented wave while attempting to secure equipment. But this explanation satisfied few. Lighthouse keepers did not abandon their posts simultaneously. The rules were explicit. One man must always remain with the light. And what of the weather? Ship's logs from vessels in the area recorded calm seas on December 15th. In 1971, the Flannan Light was automated, ending the need for keepers. The lighthouse still stands. Its beam still pierces the Atlantic darkness, but no human hand tends it now. The 3 keepers vanished into a December night, leaving behind only questions and the echo of Marshall's prophetic words. Storm ended, sea calm. God is over all. But which God, and over what? In the Northwest Territories of Canada, where the tree line surrenders to the barren grounds and winter's grip never truly loosens, there are places where the land itself seems to hold its breath. The fur trapper Joe LaBelle knew these places well. For 30 years, he had walked the trap lines that stretched between Churchill and Baker Lake, which is why, on that November evening in 1930, he knew something was terribly wrong the moment he crested the hill overlooking Anjikuni village. The village should have been alive with evening activity. Smoke should have been rising from the igloos and hide-covered huts. Dogs should have been barking at his approach. Instead, LaBelle looked down upon a settlement as still as a held breath, as silent as the moment before an avalanche. He called out the traditional greeting. No response came back, not even an echo. The first thing he noticed was the dogs, or rather, their absence. Every Inuit village had dogs, essential for transportation and hunting. But Anjikuni's dog areas were empty. The village consisted of about 8 dwellings. LaBelle approached the first igloo, calling out before pulling aside the caribou skin that covered the entrance. Inside, he found everything exactly as it should be, except for the people. A pot of caribou stew hung over a long dead fire, frozen solid. Clothing lay folded on sleeping platforms. Tools, weapons, and personal belongings remained in their proper places. It was as if the occupants had simply evaporated. LaBelle moved from dwelling to dwelling, his unease growing. In one hut, he found sealskin garments half completed, bone needles still threaded. In another, children's toys lay scattered on the floor. Food supplies remained untouched. Most disturbing were the rifles, 7 of them, left behind. In 1930, a rifle was worth its weight in gold to the Inuit. As darkness approached, LaBelle made camp at the village edge. The next morning brought new mysteries. The villagers' kayaks remained lined up on the beach. No Inuit community would abandon their boats. Even more disturbing, he discovered that the village cemetery had been disturbed. The graves had been opened and emptied, not ransacked, but methodically opened, the stones carefully stacked to the side. LaBelle searched for tracks, for any sign of where the villagers might have gone. He found nothing. No footprints led away from the village, no sled marks marked the snow. It was as if the entire population, approximately 25 to 30 people, had simply lifted into the air. When LaBelle finally reached the telegraph station at Churchill and reported his discovery, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police initially treated his account with skepticism. But the official investigation found the village exactly as LaBelle had described. Their report, filed in 1931, concluded that the villagers had abandoned their settlement for unknown reasons. Local Inuit guides, when asked about the area, would often refuse to approach the site. Animals, they said, avoided the place. Today, Anjikuni village exists in that twilight realm between history and legend. The official records are contradictory, the eyewitness accounts dismissed. Yet the story persists, passed down through generations of Northerners who know that the Barrens hold secrets that no amount of rational explanation can fully illuminate. The English came to the New World armored in certainty. They brought maps that showed empty spaces waiting to be filled, royal charters that divided the unknown into neat parcels, and the unshakable conviction that civilization followed their footsteps. What they found at Roanoke Island in 1590 was a lesson in how quickly certainty could dissolve, leaving only questions carved into silent wood. John White stood on the sandy shore, his eyes searching the tree line for any sign of the 115 souls he had left behind 3 years earlier. Among them was his daughter Eleanor and his granddaughter Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the Americas, now 3 years old if she lived. The boats ground against the sand, and White's men spread out, calling into the August heat. No answer came back. The settlement should have been bustling. Instead, White found houses carefully dismantled, not destroyed. No signs of violence. The colonists' possessions lay buried in careful caches. This was not the scene of a massacre or panic, but an organized departure. The story begins with Sir Walter Raleigh's ambition. In 1584, he received a charter to establish a colony in North America. The second expedition, in 1585, established a military outpost on Roanoke Island, but ended in disaster. The soldiers antagonized the local population, and when Sir Francis Drake arrived in 1586, they abandoned the settlement. John White's colony, the third attempt, was meant to be different. These were not soldiers, but families, men, women, and children intent on building homes. They arrived in July 1587, finding the bones of one of the 15 men left behind from the previous expedition and no other trace. The birth of Virginia Dare on August 18, 1587, seemed to herald a new beginning. 9 days later, John White sailed for England to secure supplies, promising to return within months. War with Spain intervened. He would not see Roanoke again for 3 years. When he returned on August 18, 1590, his granddaughter's 3rd birthday, he found only silence and 2 inscriptions, Croatoan carved into a post of the fort and CRO carved into a tree. The colonists had agreed that if they left under duress, they would carve a cross. White found no crosses. Croatoan was the name of both a nearby island, now Hatteras Island, and the tribe led by Manteo, who had travelled to England and returned as a friend to the colonists. But storms prevented White from sailing to Croatoan, and he was forced to return to England, never to mount another expedition. What happened to the lost colony? The most straightforward explanation is that the colonists sought refuge with friendly Native American tribes. Archaeological evidence supports this to a point. European artifacts mixed with Native American materials have been found on Hatteras Island. But if the colonists simply moved to Croatoan, why did no subsequent expedition find them? When John Lawson explored the area in 1701, he reported that the Hatteras Indians claimed some of their ancestors were white people who could talk in a book. Each theory has its advocates, its scattered pieces of evidence, its fatal gaps. What remains consistent is the organized nature of the colonists' departure. Whatever happened, they had time to prepare, time to leave word of their intentions. And yet that word, Croatoan, leads only to deeper mystery. John White spent his remaining years in England, carrying to his grave the burden of that 3-year absence. The lost colony remains America's first mystery, predating the nation itself. The word Croatoan has entered American mythology, a last message from the doomed. They were the first to learn what would become an American truth, that the continent was vast enough to swallow whole communities, leaving only names and questions behind. Between the last word spoken and the first silence that follows, something profound occurs, a transformation as definite as death, as subtle as sleep. This is how forgetting begins, not with grand proclamations or sudden darkness, but with the small surrenders, the imperceptible erosions that eventually hollow out whole histories until only the shell remains, and then not even that. We have walked through the ruins of memory, traced the outlines of vanished peoples and lost colonies, followed the footprints that lead to cliff edges and stop. Each story is unique in its details, universal in its conclusion. What once was is no longer, and we cannot say with certainty why. But perhaps the true mystery is not in the individual disappearances, but in the mechanism itself, the architecture of forgetting that seems built into the very foundations of human existence. Consider how memory works in your own life. The face of your first teacher, once as familiar as your own reflection, now blurred beyond recovery. These are small forgettings, personal erosions that trouble no one but yourself. But multiply them by millions, extend them across centuries, and you begin to understand how whole civilizations can slip through the cracks of collective memory. The process is both natural and terrible. A language dies when its last speaker draws their final breath, taking with them not just words, but entire ways of understanding the world. A skill vanishes when the last practitioner fails to pass it on. A story ends when the last listener grows tired of telling it. But there is something more deliberate at work as well. Throughout our journey through lost histories, we have seen the recurring theme of intentional erasure. The Library of Alexandria burns. The conquistadors melt down golden artifacts. The simple act of not recording. The decision that some stories are not worth preserving. And so entire worlds vanish not in catastrophe, but in oversight. Each death takes a library. Each generation fails to ask the right questions in time, and what remains is an outline where substance used to be. We comfort ourselves with the belief that modernity has solved this problem. We have archives, databases, digital storage that promises to preserve everything forever. But digital formats become obsolete. Servers fail. The Internet, that vast repository of human knowledge, is also a machine for forgetting. Websites vanish, links rot, information is edited, updated, overwritten without trace. Sometimes forgetting is mercy. The veteran who cannot recall the face of the man he killed. The society that moves forward by not looking back. But mercy comes at a cost. In forgetting pain, we also forget its lessons. The peoples and places we have explored were not forgotten by accident. Each forgetting follows a pattern. First, the living memory, those who witnessed, who knew. Then, the recorded memory, the documents, the artifacts. Finally, the reconstructed memory, what we piece together from fragments. The architecture of forgetting includes not just what we've lost, but the loss of the knowledge of loss itself. We don't know what we don't know. The gaps in history are visible only where something remains to mark their edges. In the end, we are all participants in this architecture, both its builders and its victims. Every day, we make choices about what to record and what to let slide. We are constructing the future's mysteries, creating the gaps that tomorrow's seekers will puzzle over. The architecture of forgetting is vast and patient, but it is not absolute. As long as one person wonders what happened to the princes in the tower, as long as one researcher questions the fate of vanished ancestors, memory persists in the questioning. The mystery itself becomes a form of monument. Between forgetting and remembering, we build what we can, know what we can, save what we can. It is not enough. It is never enough. But it is what makes us human, this doomed and beautiful struggle against the dark. In the Tower of London, where stone walls have absorbed 5 centuries of whispers, there is a staircase that leads nowhere. Sealed and forgotten for 200 years, it kept a secret that would emerge in 1674 when workmen, demolishing a structure, made a discovery that chilled even those accustomed to the tower's bloody history. Beneath the stones lay a wooden box, and within it 2 small skeletons lying together, as if seeking comfort in the dark. These bones were immediately declared to be those of the princes in the tower, Edward V and his younger brother Richard, Duke of York, who had entered the Tower of London in 1483 and never emerged. But bones tell incomplete stories, and the tale of the princes is written in shadows and suspicion. When Edward IV died in April 1483, he left behind 2 young sons and a kingdom balanced on a knife's edge. 12-year-old Edward V was at Ludlow Castle when news of his father's death arrived. His uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, was named Lord Protector, tasked with guiding the young king until his coronation. What happened next moved with terrible momentum. Richard intercepted young Edward on his journey to London, taking control of his person. Edward V entered the Tower in May 1483. At the time, this was not sinister. The Tower served as a royal residence as well as a prison. The coronation was set for June 22nd, but the coronation would never come. Richard had Bishop Stillington declare that Edward IV's marriage had been invalid. The children, including Edward V and his brother Richard, were therefore bastards unable to inherit. Within weeks, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, was crowned King Richard III. Young Richard joined his brother in the Tower in June. They were seen playing in the Tower gardens, observed by workmen and guards. Then, gradually, they were seen less. By autumn 1483, they had vanished entirely. The traditional narrative paints Richard as the murderous uncle, disposing of his nephews to secure his throne. But history written by the victors, and the Tudors were nothing if not victorious, deserves scrutiny. No bodies were produced at the time. No formal accusations were made during Richard's lifetime. Richard himself never addressed the boy's disappearance directly. Alternative theories multiply. Some suggest Henry Tudor himself arranged the murders after his victory at Bosworth. The Duke of Buckingham had access to the Tower and royal ambitions. Or perhaps the boys were not murdered at all. Rumours persisted for decades of their survival. The bones discovered in 1674 were interred in Westminster Abbey. In 1933, they were examined, revealing skeletons consistent with children of approximately the prince's ages. But the dating was uncertain, the identification far from conclusive. Modern DNA analysis could potentially solve the mystery, but the Church of England has refused permission for new examinations. What makes the prince's disappearance so haunting is the completeness of their erasure. Two boys, born to rule, simply cease to exist. No funeral rites, no official announcement, no marker of their passing. They fade from the record like frost from a window. The mystery haunts not because it is unsolvable, but because it represents a fundamental break in legitimacy. Kings may be overthrown, murdered, replaced, but there are forms to be observed. The princes simply vanished, taking with them the proper order of succession. Richard III died at Bosworth Field in 1485, the last English king to fall in battle. Shakespeare would transform him into a villain, but the real Richard remains as elusive as the fate of his nephews. The princes in the Tower remain forever frozen at the moment of disappearance. 112, 19, carrying the weight of a crown neither would wear. In the Catherine Palace at Tsarskoye Selo, there once existed a room that seemed to capture sunlight itself. 6 tons of amber, backed with gold leaf and mirrors, created a chamber that glowed from within. Visitors spoke of walking into warmth, into a space where the walls themselves seemed to breathe with captured life. This was the Amber Room, the 8th wonder of the world. Created in Prussia and gifted to Peter the Great, expanded under Empress Elizabeth, it represented not just wealth but the human desire to build something transcendent. For 2 centuries, it stood as proof that mankind could create spaces that rivaled nature's most spectacular achievements. Then came the war. In 1941, as Nazi forces swept toward Leningrad, Soviet curators attempted to dismantle the room for evacuation. But the amber, grown brittle with age, began to crack and crumble. In desperation, they covered it with wallpaper and gauze, hoping to disguise it. Within 36 hours of capturing the palace, German soldiers had stripped the room bare, carefully removing each panel. The pieces were packed into 27 crates and shipped to Königsberg in East Prussia, where they were reinstalled in the city's castle museum. For nearly 4 years, the Amber Room glowed again, now serving as a symbol of German cultural superiority. But the tide of war turned. By late 1944, Königsberg found itself in the path of the advancing Red Army. What happened next remains one of history's most frustrating mysteries. The museum's director, Alfred Rode, claimed to have received orders to dismantle the room once more. Then came the bombing raids and Soviet assault. Königsberg was reduced to rubble. When Soviet art detectives arrived, they found only empty frames and scattered fragments. The amber room had vanished as completely as smoke. The search that began in 1945 continues to this day, spawning thousands of leads, hundreds of excavations, and enough theories to fill libraries. Reports surfaced regularly. A German soldier claimed to have seen the room buried in a mine. A Czech refugee said he helped load the panels onto a submarine. Each lead was investigated. Each led nowhere. In 1997, German police raided an office and discovered what appeared to be a single panel from the amber room. Before authentication could be completed, it vanished into legal proceedings. Meanwhile, in St. Petersburg, authorities decided to recreate the amber room. It took 25 years and $11 million, but in 2003, a new amber room was unveiled. The recreation is stunning, yet those who remember the original say something is missing, some quality of light that spoke of centuries rather than decades. The amber room exists now primarily in memory and imagination. Perhaps it was destroyed, its amber consumed by fire. Perhaps it lies in darkness somewhere, waiting for discovery. Or perhaps it has been found and hidden again, deemed too valuable or too politically sensitive to acknowledge. 6 tons of amber, millions of years in the making, holding within their golden depths the light of vanished suns. A beauty that endures by disappearing. North of Hadrian's Wall, where the Roman Empire frowned at lands it could never quite conquer, the mist rolls in from the North Sea carrying secrets. Here, in what the Romans called Caledonia, 5,000 men, the elite 9th Legion, marched into the Scottish mists and never marched out again. The 9th Legion had earned its reputation across decades. Raised by Pompey the Great, they had fought under Julius Caesar, who valued their steadiness. "The 9th never yields," he wrote. Under the Empire, they served in Spain, earning their name Hispana. When Claudius invaded Britain in 43 CE, the 9th formed part of the spearhead. For decades they garrisoned the north, building the fortress at Eboracum, modern York. But Britain was never truly conquered. Beyond the frontier, the Caledonians and Picts waited, fighting a war of shadows and ambushes. The last certain record of the 9th places them at York in 108 CE, engaged in rebuilding. Then, sometime before 120 CE, they disappear from history. The traditional theory sends the 9th marching north to quell a rebellion, meeting their doom in some highland glen. The evidence seems compelling. When Hadrian visited Britain in 122 CE, he ordered his famous wall built, not to extend territory but to limit it. The 6th Legion was transferred from Germany to York, taking the 9th's place. But recent scholarship has complicated the mystery. Fragmentary inscriptions suggest officers from the 9th may have served elsewhere after their supposed destruction. Yet Roman military records rarely lose track of entire legions. For 5,000 men to vanish from Britain is mystery enough. For them to vanish from the empire entirely defies explanation. Alternative theories multiply. Perhaps the 9th was destroyed not by enemies, but internal strife. Some historians point to the Bar Kokhba revolt in Judea, suggesting the ninth was transferred there and destroyed. But again, records should exist. The archaeological evidence tells its own cryptic story. Roman artifacts appear in Scottish hoards, but are these trade goods or battlefield loot? Mass graves that might hold the ninth remain undiscovered, though Scotland's acidic soil could have dissolved bones centuries ago. The Ninth Legion's eagle standard has never been recovered. For Romans, the loss of an eagle was the ultimate disgrace. Did it rest in some Caledonian shrine, or was it melted down, its symbolic power destroyed? Today, tourists walk Hadrian's Wall, that monument to imperial limitation. Somewhere in the Scottish landscape, perhaps, lie the remains of 5,000 men who discovered that discipline and the eagles of Rome were not always enough. They marched into the mist and became mist themselves, achieving strange immortality, remembered not for how they died, but for how they didn't, forever on that final march between civilization and whatever lies beyond. In the courtyard of the Franciscan monastery at Mani, Yucatan, the fire burned for hours. Fed by centuries of knowledge, the flames leaped higher than the mission walls. It was July 12, 1562, and Diego de Landa, Bishop of Yucatan, stood watching as Maya books turned to smoke and ash. "We found a large number of books," he would later write, "and as they contained nothing but superstition and lies of the devil, we burned them all." What burned that day was not paper but bark, the inner bark of the fig tree, beaten flat, covered with limestone paste, folded accordion style into books the Maya called hun. Upon these surfaces, scribes had painted knowledge accumulated over millennia, astronomical observations that predicted eclipses centuries in advance, mathematical calculations using 1,000 years before Europe, histories of dynasties that rose and fell before Rome was founded. Each codex was a library unto itself, painted in carbon black and Maya blue, that extraordinary pigment whose recipe died with the civilization that created it. The glyphs danced across the pages, human figures, animals, gods, geometric patterns that encoded one of the world's most sophisticated writing systems. How many burned at Mani? Landa's testimony suggests dozens, perhaps hundreds. The smoke that rose that day carried astronomy, mathematics, history, mythology, medicine, the accumulated wisdom of one of the world's great civilizations reduced to carbon and regret. From the hundreds of thousands of codices that once existed, exactly 4 survived that we can authenticate as pre-Columbian. 4 books from an entire civilization. The Dresden Codex tracks the movements of Venus with uncanny accuracy. The Madrid Codex focuses on rituals and ceremonies. The Paris Codex contains prophecies. The Grolier Codex consists of Apenas 11 pages tracking Venus cycles. Yet the destruction was never complete. The Maya began transcribing their knowledge into the Latin alphabet, hiding ancient wisdom in the colonizers' script. The Popol Vuh, the Quiche Maya creation epic, was preserved this way. The books of Chilam Balam represent another stream of preservation, blending pre-Columbian knowledge with colonial experience. As Maya writing has yielded to decipherment, the scale of loss has become ever clearer. We know there were historical chronicles, medical texts, books of songs and poetry, architectural treatises. Most tantalizing are hints of geographical knowledge that extended far beyond the Maya homeland. Diego de Landa later suffered a crisis of conscience, trying to reconstruct what he had burned. But even in trying to preserve, he obscured. adding another layer to the palimpsest of loss. The burning of the Maya codices stands as history's most successful act of censorship, destroying not just books, but ways of knowing. We will never read Maya perspectives on the conquest, never know their philosophies except in fragments. Somewhere in that smoke were cures for diseases, astronomical observations that might have advanced science by centuries. The 4 surviving codices sit in their climate-controlled cases, consulted like oracles, reminding us with every translation of how much we cannot translate, how much we will never know. In the vaulted halls of Bosnia's National Museum, behind bulletproof glass and climate controls, rests a book that has survived more attempts on its life than most humans. The Sarajevo Haggadah, illuminated with gold and lapis lazuli in 14th century Spain, has escaped the Spanish Inquisition, Nazi collectors, and artillery bombardment. Its pages, depicting the Jewish exodus from Egypt, have themselves experienced exodus repeatedly. Created when Jews, Muslims, and Christians shared the intellectual wealth of medieval Iberia, the Haggadah represents a flowering of culture that would soon be crushed. When Ferdinand and Isabella expelled the Jews in 1492, this book began its journey eastward, carried by refugees to the relative tolerance of the Ottoman Empire. For centuries it rested in Sarajevo, that crossroads city where East met West. Then came 1941. When Nazi officers arrived to confiscate Jewish treasures, the Muslim chief librarian, Dervish Korkut, spirited the Haggadah away, hiding it in a mosque among Quranic manuscripts, one holy book protecting another. The Haggadah survived World War II only to face new danger in the 1990s as Sarajevo endured the longest siege in modern warfare. While shells fell and snipers haunted the streets, museum workers moved the manuscript repeatedly, sometimes carrying it through active combat zones. During one bombardment, the museum's director found himself using his body to shield the glass case from shrapnel. Why such devotion to parchment and pigment? Because the Sarajevo Haggadah represents more than religious text. Its wine stains speak of Passover seders across centuries, its marginalia in different hands, Hebrew, Arabic, Latin, testament to its journey across cultures. One page bears a child's fingerprint, preserved for 500 years, a tactile connection to a young reader in an unimaginable past. Today, the Haggadah remains in Sarajevo, survivor of purges and wars, reminder that while cities burn and peoples scatter, sometimes beauty endures through sheer stubborn existence and the courage of those who risk everything to preserve what others would destroy. On a frozen February night in 1917, as revolution swept through Petrograd, the last treasures of Imperial Russia began their own diaspora. Among them were several Fabergé eggs, those jeweled fantasies that had marked Easter celebrations in palaces that would soon run red with blood. While the fate of the Romanov family is well documented, the journey of their treasures into darkness remains largely unwritten. The constellation egg of 1917, if it was ever completed, would have been the last imperial egg, a midnight blue fantasy set with diamonds forming the constellation under which Tsarevich Alexei was born. Fabergé's workshops were creating it even as crowds gathered in the streets. Did it ever reach the Empress, or does it sit somewhere, unrecognized, its celestial map pointing to a dynasty that fell to earth? In the chaos of revolution, imperial treasures were hastily catalogued by Bolsheviks who saw in them only bourgeois excess to be converted to currency. But the cataloguers were not art historians. How many eggs were miscategorized, their significance missed? The 1917 inventory lists various jeweled objects that could hide any number of missing masterpieces. Some eggs certainly escaped. The Necessaire egg was sold by Stalin's government to raise foreign currency, then vanished into private hands. Others may have been smuggled out by loyal servants or hidden by aristocrats who hoped the nightmare would pass. In Paris, London, and New York, Russian émigrés occasionally produced treasures to sell for survival, but they learned to be circumspect about provenance. The search for missing Romanov eggs has produced a peculiar subset of the art world: hunters who haunt estate sales, study old photographs with magnifying glasses, and chase rumors through the descendants of royal servants. They know that somewhere, perhaps in an attic or safe deposit box, an egg worth millions sits unrecognized, its mechanical secrets wound down, its surprises waiting for one more Easter that will never come. In the Superstition Mountains east of Phoenix, where saguaro cacti stand like ancient sentinels and the rocks themselves seem to shift when you're not watching, there lies a fortune that has killed more men than it has enriched. The lost Dutchman's mine, if it exists at all, hides somewhere in those twisted canyons, guarded by more than mere geology. Jacob Waltz, the Dutchman who was actually German, died in Phoenix in 1891, taking with him the secret of a gold mine so rich that he could pull out nuggets the size of turkey eggs whenever he needed money. On his deathbed, he supposedly revealed clues to its location to Julia Thomas, who cared for him, but the directions were fragmentary, contradictory, filtered through delirium. The gold was real. Waltz would appear in Phoenix with ore so rich that assayers accused him of salting samples. He paid for drinks with nuggets, bought supplies with raw gold that mineralogists confirmed could only have come from a single source, a source that matched no known mine in the territory. After Waltz's death, the search began in earnest. The mountains themselves seem complicit in keeping the secret. The superstitions are a labyrinth of volcanic rock, fractured into a landscape that defies easy navigation. Compass needles spin wildly in areas of high mineral content. Then there are the deaths. The superstitions have claimed over 600 lives, many directly connected to the search. Some are clearly accidents, falls from cliffs, dehydration, but others defy explanation. Prospectors found with bullets in their backs, headless corpses discovered in remote canyons. Adolf Ruth arrived in 1931 with what he claimed was a map drawn by a Peralta survivor. 6 months later, his skull was found with 2 bullet holes in it. His skeletal remains were discovered separately, miles away. In his effects was a note: Veni, vidi, vici, about 200 feet across from cave. Modern searchers employ technology Waltz couldn't have imagined: ground-penetrating radar, drones, satellite analysis. Yet the mine remains hidden. Some claim this proves it never existed. Others argue that the unique geology of the superstitions defeats modern instruments, just as it defeated traditional prospecting. There are those who claim to have found the mine, but kept silent. Former Arizona Attorney General Bob Corbin reportedly told close friends he had located it, but would never reveal the location, fearing the violence that would follow. The Apache tell different stories. Some say the gold is cursed, protected by the thunder god who lives atop Superstition Mountain. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect is how the search changes those who pursue it. Rational people become obsessed. Honest people become secretive. The mountains seem to bring out something primal in searchers. As Phoenix sprawls ever closer to the superstitions, the mountains remain inviolate. In those hidden canyons, the lost Dutchman's mind waits or doesn't wait, exists or doesn't exist. Jacob Waltz took his secret to the grave, but secrets have a way of outliving their keepers. The mine remains lost, and perhaps that's its true treasure. Not the gold it may contain, but the mystery it represents. The last blank space on the map, where fortune might still favor the bold, the persistent, or the mad. And so we return to where we began, to the silence between memory and forgetting, to the spaces where history stutters and skips. We have walked through vanished villages and empty towers, followed the footprints of those who stepped out of the world, traced the outlines of treasures that dissolved like morning mist. Each story unique in its details, yet all of them singing the same unsettling song. That our grip on this world is more tenuous than we dare acknowledge. What have we learned in our journey through these lost histories? Perhaps only that learning itself has limits, that knowledge is not a fortress against the unknown, but a candle flame that illuminates just enough to show us how vast the darkness remains. The princes in the tower, the keepers of Eilean Moor, the colonists of Roanoke, they all step through doorways we cannot see, leaving us to wonder not just where they went, but whether the very question, where, applies to the places they have gone. The architecture of forgetting we explored reveals itself not as a flaw, but as a feature. Perhaps we forget because we must, because total memory would paralyze us. Yet still the mysteries call to us. Still we search for the lost Dutchman's mine. Still we scan the seafloor for vanished ships. Still we dig for lost legions. Not because we truly expect to find them, but because the search itself is what makes us human. These lost histories restore to us the mystery that modernity seeks to abolish. In an age that promises to explain everything, to predict everything, to control everything, these vanished people and lost treasures remind us that uncertainty is not a problem to be solved, but the ocean in which we swim. The lost histories we have explored tonight are not puzzles to be solved, but koans to be contemplated. They tell us that the past is not past, that the lost are not lost but transformed, that every ending is also a doorway. In the space between sleeping and waking, between memory and forgetting, between what we know and what we'll never know, the lost histories live on, not as facts, but as possibilities, not as answers, but as eternal questions. Sleep now and dream of doors that open onto nothing, of lights that kindle and fail, of children who speak in colors and saints who step into the sky. For in the end, the true mystery is not that things vanish, but that anything remains at all. We are all tomorrow's mysteries, waiting to be wondered about, waiting to be lost, waiting to be found. The silence resumes its ancient work, but it is a different silence now, peopled with possibilities, pregnant with the unspoken, rich with all that was and might have been, and somehow, impossibly, still is. Sleep well and dream of doors.